Yes, I love.
Okay, everybody, that's it. Now I talk. That's it. So, welcome to, welcome, first of all, welcome all the people who've been on a lot. And there are some who've been with me from the very, very beginning, amazingly. I think the 11th or 12th one, I've lost count, actually. We've talked about lots of things. We've been getting deeper and deeper. We talked about the self and nothing and time. And what else did we talk about? It is what it is. Objectivity, which is a good one. And anyway, we've got deeper and deeper, and we started off small. And now that we've got, I don't know how many we've got at the moment. How many have we got, Debbie?
37.
37.
Oh,
39.
crikey. Oh, crikey.
39.
Okay. Well,
There must be people that I can't see then.
38.
would everybody please put on their videos? I won't. Nobody can come in and talk if I don't see them, apart from the one who said they haven't got one. Can you please put on your videos? Oh, hi there, James. Good to see you. The other James. Now I've got two Jameses. And I've only got, okay. So that's it. Now I talk. So the point is that we started small, and word must have got out. We seem to be doing something good or well, but we started off as an experiment of sort of doing philosophy as if like in an Athens sort of square, where we just bounce things off each other, and what I call doing philosophy. I could sit here and talk for an hour and a half without any problem whatsoever, and then do question and answer, but that's not what we do here. And strangely, actually, Zoom it's somehow more like one of these ancient Greek squares than actually standing in front of people. I'm trying to work that out, why that is. It seems to be, I find that Zoom just replacing being somewhere is not the way it should be, or the way that I think it is. But anyway, now that we've got lots of people, I need to change the format a bit, because I used to start off and say, stop me whenever you want. Now that was asking for trouble, because what happened was that I said one sentence and somebody leapt at me. And that was very problematic. I could never really get out what I really wanted to say, because as soon as somebody talked, everybody else joined in, and there was a terrific conversation, but nothing to do with what I actually wanted to really get across. So therefore, I'm going to be a bit tougher this time, and we're going to do it very, very slightly differently, in that I'm going to speak for a bit, only for a bit, and then I'm going to open it up, and you can talk about what I talked about, etc. But at least we're going to move along, and I can put forward some of the things I want to. Okay, so what we do here basically is we question assumptions so basically so basic that they often go unexamined. It's a point that is sometimes so close we don't notice it. But excuse me a second, I've got to close my door. You all came in before I was ready. Don't go away. Okay, you're all still there. Brilliant. Okay, so I just want to, I saw something very interesting that Elon Musk said the other day. He said, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths you can imagine, and you reason up from there. This is a good way to figure out if something really makes sense, or if it's just what everyone else is doing. Okay, I like that. And to quote another rich person, Jeff Bezos said that day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it is always day 1. And I like to think that the first Sunday of the month meetings are always day 1. And we always want to move on to something deeper and deeper and not get stuck down and do what other people do. So what we are doing is a sort of Socratic self-questioning. It's interesting because we're self-questioning, but there are lots of us. So each of us is self-questioning ourselves, bouncing off other people, which I think is interesting. In any case, anyway, this is philosophy versus science. So we're going to see if they're compatible and where they are, and I think they always are, but that's what we will decide together. So what philosophy and science have in common is that they both ask questions and give answers. And they are about us. Oh, Terry, good.
Yes, my apologies. My alarm didn't go off, and I thought I was doing fine. And
it's fine. It's good you're here. Somebody actually asked for you, so you're an important part of this whole thing. So
well, I've been looking forward to it. I just
okay.
Alarm. I don't know what's with my alarm. It went off earlier, but didn't go off then.
On the first Sunday of the month, you must not rely on alarms.
This is true.
Okay, so philosophy and science have in common, they both ask questions and give answers, and they are about us in the world. That's why the subtitle of my last book, Time to Tell, is a look at how we tick. And that's the most important part of everything that I do in philosophy. It's a look at how we tick. So science and philosophy will ask basically, what's it all about? That's the basic question. What's going on is basically what we're all asking, to which I say it's all interpretation, all of it. Now that is a deeper thing than you think. It's all interpretation. Therefore, what I'm saying is that to say that something is real is extremely dodgy, because it's all our interpretation of what's going on in the world. Okay? At this point, if I hadn't made the rules, somebody now would leap at me. But lucky I said what I said. You'll have to wait until I tell you that it's time to talk. Okay, so to me, what matters about mental states is what they do, not what they are made of. So for me, for example, time is what effects it has on us, not what it is. Not what time is not important. It is what it does to us and what we do with it. So this is a form of functionalism. It's nice to say, as Hilary Putnam did, that philosophy should relate to the real world. But as you might have gathered, and those who read my books, and there are quite a few here who have, and those who've been with me before realize that for me presents a problem, because what is the real world? And we will get to the reality later. So you're not very nice and quiet this thing. Oh, hi, Roland. Well done.
Hi.
So basically, my interest in philosophy is not as a support system for theories of science. Right? I don't agree, I mentioned this last time, by the way, with Rebecca Goldstein's view that science is our best answer, but it takes philosophy to prove that. I don't think that science is our best answer. I think that often philosophy is, and perhaps they look at the same thing from different angles, but I do not think that we are here to support science. Okay, when my theories correspond with science, I'm delighted. Actually, I'm delighted, but not because I've supported science, but because science has supported my theories. So an example is backward causation, which came out of what I was writing in time, and I realized that through my theories of time, it is possible, and it happens, that we change the past from where we are. And I will explain that. But I didn't call it backward causation, by the way, but I did write out the possibility. What happened was that while I was writing, I was reading about science and about quantum mechanics, and I was amazed to find that is a part of quantum mechanics, and it's called backward causation. When I'd written it out and I realized that actually exists in inverted commas in science, I was very pleased, but I was also stunned, and I put it in an end note that quantum mechanics actually refers to that, so that science actually supported what I was saying and not the other way around, which is very, very nice. That's where it should be. I mean, if I say things that are totally against what science says, it would be a bit strange. Although I have to admit, there will come a point tonight, if we get to it, where I will show you that neither philosophy nor science agrees with me. But that's what you can expect in these evenings. But by the way, those who are not here, 2 or 3 months ago, I showed you that 2 and 2 is not 4, that 2 and 2 is 2. And that's the sort of things you might get in an evening here. Anyway, so look, scientists are often very, very snobbish and dismissive of philosophy. Let me give you an example. I mentioned this last time, but I have to mention it again because it's really important. Consider the claim made by Lawrence Krauss, and excuse me that I'm saying this again for those who are here, that the universe was created from nothing. All right, as many of you know, I wrote a book about nothing. I spent 5 years doing nothing, and I got paid for doing nothing, which is wonderful. But in any case, I do know something about nothing. All right, so when Lawrence Krauss said that the universe was created from nothing, I was a bit sort of surprised. But dismissing concerns about what nothing is, Krauss writes, and I quote, "I don't really give a damn about what nothing means to philosophers. I care about the nothing of reality." Cheek. Now that cheek is me, by the way. And if the nothing of reality is full of stuff, then I'll go with that. Now that is an incredible thing to say, because if nothing is not nothing, but is something, then a universe from something is nothing to shout out about. I mean, what's the big deal? Okay. But by the way, when Krauss was asked if the laws of physics were there before the Big Bang, and that therefore there was something there, he answered that he wasn't interested in going into that. Now, I find that an example of hubris, arrogance, and a disdain for a discipline like philosophy that dares to tread upon the turf that bothers him with facts. Why bother me with facts? If I say that nothing is something, then that's fine. But if nothing is something, then you can't get something from it. But that's another story. Okay, so there is no science without an attendant philosophy, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. Okay, so there are 2 parts to this meeting. All right, the first part is the is the easier one. The second part, if we get to it, which I doubt, but that's just if we get to the second part, which is deeper, and it's the nitty-gritty of thought. We'll be dealing with reality and deeper science, etc., which will be extremely interesting if we get to it. If we don't get to it, it doesn't matter, because we can always move on to it next month, it makes no difference. And it makes no difference not only because we haven't finished it, because part of my philosophy is that we never finish anything. There are no limits. There is no end to anything, right? Because of approximation, etc. So the fact that we don't finish something would be a worry, but it isn't. But by the way, there are a lot of people here who do not have their videos on. And if you want to ask a question, I won't take it if you don't have the video. And I do want you to have your videos on, please. Can you please do so? Thank you. So here comes the easier part. And my question is, can we seriously consider science without examining ethics? That's the question. And can ethics be scientific? Ethics can be seen as non-scientific knowledge, perhaps. Last time what we spoke about was whether we should ethically use experiments that were done on humans. We talked about experiments done in concentration camps in Germany. We spoke about experiments done in the 40s and 50s in the States on people in radiation that were in I've got an echo, that were close to atomic bombs, etc. These were experiments done on people to see what the results would be. Now the question is, should we use those scientific facts, and they're useful? Should we use them ethically? And what about art that's made by criminals and murderers? Should it be bought? That's another ethical question. And another one, just to keep you going, is if it's good art, can art be good if it's done by bad people? Can a bad person, and we do know a few, do something good? That is a question. I've seen a proposal that science should initially be separated from ethics during the process, and then merge it back with ethics for the results and aftermath of that process. So first you do the science, then you don't worry about ethics, but you worry about it afterwards when the science is done. Now that is impossible, because you can't forget what you've discovered. You can't put the genie back into the bottle. Once the atom bomb was made, nobody could forget that they've got this horrible thing. It just couldn't be done. And that is my first break. And now all the stuff, now you can let out all your energy and discuss anything that you would like to, a part of what I spoke to, etc. I will try, if you can put your hand up or do the sign of the hand. I'm not sure I can see everybody here. I don't know how this works, but okay, the first one I see is George. Pardon? I see George and Bill.
Thank you,
for a start. Okay, George, you were first. Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Could you make it a bit louder?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you. Thank you. Just very quickly, just on this, coming at this question, and I'm interested in the questions you put forward, but in this relationship between philosophy and science, what keeps coming to my mind is the question of justice, right? I mean, I submit that humans are creatures of justice, that we pursue science for justice. And within that, of course, there are all types of debates, what's knowledge, et cetera, and so forth. And that we judge science ultimately based on justice. Does it serve the goal of justice? And so, I mean, and of course, the question that you pose, presumably people come at them, is it ethical to do certain kinds of science? Is it ethical to do science that we know was done unethically, a la the Holocaust, or a la what was done in the post-World War II period in the United States? I mean, we come at these questions and ask, does it serve the issue of justice? Right? Of course, people are going to say, well, what's the definition of justice? Of course, that's what we philosophize about. But the point is that, right, we discuss science and think about science, this idea of science standing alone and apart from humanity or human values, I mean, it's just patently false. I mean, of course, why do we engage in science is really the first question that comes to mind. And again, I come back to this question of justice, broadly conceived. So those are my 2 cents.
George, are you saying that there is an objective justice in the world?
I would submit personally that I do believe that. I follow the Hegelian line on this, and I believe that objective justice is a modern classless society completely free of ethnic and gender biases. Now, that's the meta justice that I believe that is ideally humanity's moving towards, and that ideally we judge ourselves against that meta narrative that I'm positing. Now, of course, there's lower levels, right, of how do we deal with certain questions within that broader framework, right? But so I do subscribe to the notion of objective justice. I come in it somewhat differently than Ron and you do. I don't build up. I try to build down. I try to, okay, what's the meta argument? And then relate that to specific instances to give me intellectual normative guidance. And I think that's the way we should all really approach the question. Not from the small, because you get lost. You have to start from the big.
Okay, we'll get to the big and the small. We'll get the second part will be the very small. Bill.
Yes, I really like the idea that science is supporting theory, as you said, but I'd like to reframe it just slightly differently. It seems to me that science provides ethics for problem-solving behavior. By that I mean it sets a way of approaching it that takes us into an evidence question very soon. In other words, problem solving can be done crazily by the conspiracy theorists. It can be done impulsively and stupidly. But an ethics that would rely on science to support a solution is an ethic that says we need to look at the evidence. We need to look at the context and predict the consequences of our choices and our problems that we have. So in other words, it's a theory that we propose or a solution we propose that gets tested by an ethic of science, which is evidence-based and which is determinative of the predictable, discoverable facts that a choice or a solution has. And I think today, with the conspiracy theory prominence that's everywhere, we need a reinstatement of ethics of problem solving that isn't going to take us down roads of disaster. And I think a reinstatement of science as an ethical model for decision-making and solution giving is really an important idea. And I think the idea that science is supporting solutions or should support solution is an ethical proposition that I think is important for everyone to discuss and for us to disseminate.
Okay, Ben, you were next, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, Ron, how you were touching on the fact that scientists tend to be snobbish towards philosophers. And William, you were speaking of the importance of science as an ethical framework of like how to determine solutions. And part of the snobbery has a lot to do with the epistemological framework, right? How we determine what we know to be true or not. And I think that there's so much wayward knowledge nowadays that I just agree with William that we need to go back and analyze where we're coming from and analyze how we know what we know in order to build on a secure foundation. And I mean, essentially the scientific discoveries that were made by the Germans, like the Germans were a paradox. They were highly rational and scientific focused, but then they had tons of irrational ideas. So anyways, I won't go on, but that's all I have to say.
Okay, fine, thank you. James, I like all these people who got their hands up, their blue hands, wonderful, I can see that, that's great. James, well done.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I like what Bill said about science having its own contribution to ethics. I think we have to recognize that there are many sources of ethics in society, and not just science. So, as long as science is just basically putting itself in the queue, which it does, I think that's fine. But I don't think we should ignore ethics according to the justice system, ethics according to the government, what some people call the zeitgeist, the idea that the society has the Hegelian idea that society has a spirit. We should not ignore suffering in society. That those things have nothing to do with science specifically. They have to do with everyday experience. And if science, we can't be single-minded and give science the keys to the castle in terms of justice, in terms of ethics. We have to draw from a wide palette, and that is the part of the job of philosophy. So this is why philosophy has a separate purpose and keeps itself distinct in a wide number of areas, not just in the area of ethics and justice.
Okay, very interesting. I'm going to go from left to right. So that Richard.
Okay, I would like to start by saying that philosophy means a love of all knowledge, but the trouble is the different parts of philosophy split off, so that science and history and geography became separate disciplines. And for a time in the early 1900s, all that philosophy was left with was the philosophy of language. And then several thinkers like Russell and Wittgenstein re-emerged and took over everything again, so that science can't exist without the philosophy of science. People like Popper work out how the methodology works. And in fact, the difference is scope of the methodology. Science is limited to some extent by sticking to a very factual approach, which means that we can test whether or not it's right. Philosophy still allows an a priori way of approaching the world and questions. Russell put it that philosophy was tied up with maths, logic, and language. And that is the same sort of difference as you get between natural language, which allows any approach and allows poetry and allows metaphor, and a formal language, like a programming language, where you will actually be exact. Your syntax has to be exact. Your meaning has to be exact, but you're limited. You're in a box rather than being able to go beyond the box. So the main difference really is how thinking can go. And Ron quoted a scientist whose name I've forgotten, who went on about nothingness. I suspect that he was referring to Heidegger's view of nothingness. And quite honestly, I'm I was when I was young, very fond of trying to work out what Heidegger meant. But I would not argue that I know what Heidegger meant. Just one last thing, you talked about art and literature, or the arts generally. It doesn't matter. Nearly every writer that I know of, nearly every artist I know of, my grandfather was an artist. They've all got problems as people because they are all so wound up in their own ideas and their own thoughts. I don't say I'd be a great writer if I was more egocentric, but I know that without being so egocentric that you forget about your family, you forget about everything else, and you just concentrate on what you're doing and what your work, you won't produce it. So I would argue that every artist is flawed. Works of art stand as a work of art. They do not depend on who the writer, the artist, the person who created them was.
I have to make a comment about that.
Yeah.
With a question. If there's a psychopath or somebody who mass murderer,
yeah,
and there's his art, you'd say that that's okay, that's fine, I'll buy that.
Okay, in the Victorian Albert it was, I think, there's some statues that were carved by a murderer back in Cromwell's day. No, not Cromwell, back in the 1700s. I can't remember exactly when. They're incredibly strong, even though they've been weathered, because they used to stand, actually he was not only a murderer, he was mad as well. And they used to stand
that helps.
Outside Bedlam. And so they've been weathered, but you can see the strength of them. Now,
yeah, but Richard,
it's the strength that gets you.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but talking about people in the 16th century and talking about somebody who did it last year, I think those are two different questions.
Okay. Yes,
if we're going to talk about ethics and morals, and then we decide that that the ethics of somebody in the 16th century was not what we expect today. At the time, ethics were different, and that we're going into a whole problem of ethics, which we will go into. But if you are going to compare what we consider now to be ethical and what people 500 years thought about being ethical, we won't get anywhere. We will have to get rid of everything that ever happened. It's a very, very difficult question, and we're going to get to it, whether things that we consider to be correct, or whichever way term you want to use, today is the same as what happened 500 years ago, and we have to judge people 500 years ago the way we judge them today. That is a very, very difficult statement to make, that I'm not sure that we can make it, basically. But that's we're going to get onto that, which is truth, and we spoke about that on one of our other occasions. But we will actually move on to that. So okay, thank you. That interesting, and it leaves a lot of stuff open. And next on the list is Moshe.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, I've got two things. One is we always concentrate, or I'll say get hung up on these extremely negative examples like the Holocaust and things like that. That being said, there was a woman last week when we were talking, or last month when we were talking about ethics, I guess. She was saying that with her kids, she has this ethical tool kit that she has. And that some theories apply in some situations and some theories apply in other situations. And so I would like to make the following experiment, which is to combine act utilitarianism, of which I'm not a particular fan on a conceptual level, with pragmatism. And the experiment would be this: if we could go out and hang one innocent person that we picked off the street at random, and as a result of that, it would end poverty, end racism, end discrimination, make everyone live happily, and so that they could pursue the philosophical life. Would that be all right? Would that be acceptable?
Yes.
Let me just repeat it again.
That's the trolley problem, and very extreme. If you find that one person, he must be really monster. So I'm for it.
Okay, let me just finish.
If the whole of civilization depends on that one person, yeah, get rid of him. That's the end of that.
The point of philosophy a lot of times is to take things out to their extreme so that we can really see what the assumptions are that we're dealing with. So that's my first thing, and I agree with you. Let's find the guy, girl, and string them up. The second is not in the ethical realm, but it goes back to something that you said at the beginning where you were talking about backward causation. And so I'd like you to show me what you could do today to make it such that Caesar did not cross the Rubicon. If there is backward causation, we should be able to have something practical like that.
Yeah.
I used to remember
Okay.
studying Hegel that he could deduce anything, and I would say, okay, deduce my pencil.
I have two propositions. The easy one, you buy my book. I mean, don't have to buy it, borrow it, steal it, do anything you want with it. Time to tell where I explain it. The second thing, you've missed it because we did talk about time, but we will again in the future. And you will see that what we talk about in the future will have changed what we talked about in the past. Ta-da. But you will see that when we do it. And I can't go into that now. I'm sorry, because it's a very long. I mean, it's a process. And
so is that sort of like Benjamin's idea that criticism, art criticism, is actually part of the creative process, and that what we bring to a piece of art or philosophy or anything like that in the future actually changes what the object was at that time, which goes back to your theory of it's all about interpretation, which I have no problem with it if that's what we're talking about, but I don't see how objectively it has changed anything.
But you must never use the word objectively with me, by the way. It's okay.
Well, gee, Dad,
I don't go for anything objective in any way. That's the bottom line of everything I say. So anybody who wants to use objective or real or reality, it'll start me off on a long tirade of stuff. But I'm just joking. But
is observable an okay word?
Which one?
Observable.
Very okay word. A wonderful word. Lovely. I love it.
Okay.
I'm just joking. Everybody can say any word they want. I will boil quietly. It's fine. I was just joking. And we're going to come back to you, all of you. Okay. Next, Augustine, and then Emmy. Okay. Just so I remember.
Right, thank you. Hello. Yes, so I want to say a couple of things. The first one about ethics as a kind of scientific discipline, as a problem-solving scientific discipline. So I agree with the idea that it's important to get ethics involved in the moral debates that we have around nowadays. It's very important. So I agree with the idea that was shared by William. I think it's as important as right now to defend a concept of truth, although we have critique here the concept of truth, obviously. So it's important to defend us from many problems that we got, like fake news, post-truth, and populism. But then, that is one thing, and then on the other hand, the debate about what is truth, which we have discussed here, I think it must continue. I think it has to carry on. So I like to follow here this idea that Descartes used to say, Descartes. And so basically that being executive about everything. However, when you get sick, you go to the physician. And then coming back to the discussion between philosophy and science, this was an idea that was shared in another discussion in Zoom this week, is actually that we need philosophy to understand what is the purpose of science. And that means kind of like the final question that must confront science is actually a philosophical one. So that is something that there is no test, no rigorous methodology in which you can sort out what is the purpose of science. And normally we used to say that the purpose of science is to know the truth of things. But then we realized that sometimes it's more related with power, with freedom, with the ability to do things. and to know things that with truth in itself. So that question, which is the ultimate question of science, is actually a philosophical one. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yes, good point. Okay, Emmy, your turn.
No, I'm really glad that I get to speak after Augustine, because I wanted to, I also agree that philosophy allows us to ask interesting questions, and science kind of helps us answer them. So I'm going to approach this with the hubris of being a scientist, but also the self-doubt of being a graduate student in philosophy. So one of the interesting things about science is that it gives us the capacity to engage with abstract thought. And if we want to, forgive me for referencing 17th century philosophers here, Galileo Galilei, he created the scientific method, the foundations of the scientific method. Let's not give him too much credit, by examining how a chandelier swung from the ceiling of his church every time a door opened and shut, and he could measure that it was continuous in its rhythm of slowing to a stop, and was capable of understanding that the laws of physics applied to everything proportional to weight, and thus we can take this abstract idea and apply it to the rest of the world. And one of the incredible challenges of ethics is it's often an emotional response. We don't have an abstraction of what we are feeling in any given moment. And so science might not answer this question, but sorry, a bit of feedback there. Science may not answer this question of how to approach ethics, but it does give us a framework of not delving too much into what we perceive as reality, but understanding the abstractions of meaning, of how we are engaging with this problem, and what other circumstances that have similar circumstances might mean for the way that we engage with it.
Okay, fair enough. I just want to make a point. There's chat going on, which I do not see, and nor does anybody else, unless the people are doing it out. It's a shame, because there's some very good stuff. Now and again, I click on and I see everybody's talking away. Which is okay. I won't see it till afterwards, till tomorrow. So if you could possibly let the rest of us hear what we are seeing, if we'd see, then it would definitely help, because some of the stuff is very good, but it's getting lost, which is a shame. And we're all here to talk to each other. If you could please, I saw Richard wrote something very interesting, but it disappeared, which is problematic. So without further ado, we're gonna, Claudio, yes.
Thank you. Yes, I want to focus a little bit on the question, can science do without ethics, or does it need it? And the cruel experiments done in the concentration camps. Yes, I believe that science needs ethics, and it needs philosophers to do it, because they're better at it. Because the focus of scientists is mainly in regards to progress. It's materially and technologically, right? So philosophy can broaden that focus, right? And the ethics aspect prevents science from becoming an existential threat to the individual, society, and humanity as a whole. An example of that would be, let's say, AI, or let's say mind uploading, which might be possible in the future. Now, the philosopher will ask questions like, and even answer them, like, is this type of technology, will it be liberating or oppressive, right? The science usually doesn't ask that question, because the focus is very narrow. And another example is the concentration camp experiments, the cruel experiments done on innocent people. That's another type. That's another example of science working without morality or ethics, just material advancement, whatever it is. So by condoning that kind of science without the ethical element and moral elements, then it justifies murder, it justifies racism, all the reasons behind those experiments, because it can become very complex. Racism, hatred, social Darwinism. So it's good. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna do okay, I've got a few up there. Let's do Michael. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, fine, lovely.
Yeah, first I want to talk about what you were talking about with the artist's relation to him being a murderer. Should his art be purchased or not? I agree with Richard. I believe that it really doesn't matter what his acts or what he has done with his life, if he's been a good or bad person, because his art could contribute to us as humans as a whole. So I don't think it's a negative thing or it shouldn't be accepted.
Why?
But wait, were you going to say something?
No, I just asked why. Why do you think that there's no connection? Just out of interest.
I don't know. It's because it's the art isn't related to the person. It's not. It shouldn't be judged because of the person. I don't think it has anything to. I don't think it has any judgment to be made. You can't judge a piece of art. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense to me. It doesn't make sense. It's like science. It's just data. It's just something to learn from.
Okay. Can I then make a really give you a tough example?
Yes.
Just occurred to me. Let's say that you see a piece of art. It's absolutely wonderful. And you find out afterwards that art is actually made from the blood of that artist's victim. The red all over that, absolutely amazing, but it's the blood of somebody who just killed. What would you say about that?
The art was still beautiful when you looked at it.
So
now you have an emotional tie that might skew your reality of the art, but you still found it beautiful. You still found it fascinating.
And you'd
let me ask you a question.
It would be okay to buy it. I'm just asking, would it be okay to buy it? I mean,
I don't believe that it shouldn't not be okay.
Okay.
I think it would be fine to buy it.
Okay.
Because it's I feel like art doesn't have to deal with the act. I feel like it's separate. It's just, like I said, it's just data.
Okay.
And let's say like I understand it's just like let's say like a murderer who or somebody who constructed genocide, but he created something like the Mona Lisa. It's still a beautiful image that could contribute to society as seeing that beauty for the society as a whole. So I think that's where I stand with it. If it helps society as a whole, it's fine. It should be shared with everybody.
Okay. Okay, thank you. James K, yes. And then after that, we're going to get to Roland and Lucas. Okay, if I remember, that's the order. And then Fika, I have to remember that myself. Okay, where are you?
Yeah, in regards to this question of science and philosophy, seems that for me, it seems that science has a microscopic, view or understanding or knowledge about the world, and the philosophy has more of a macroscopic, understanding or tries to achieve knowledge in that way. So it's pretty much inclusive. We have areas like ontology, metaphysics, aesthetics, axiology, and so forth. These are things that that science is not interested in because they're invisible to them. Science is interested in the microscopic,
okay,
in terms of what is empirical and be viewed. And that's why when you use example of Krauss's idea of nothingness, it's something that he's not used to dealing with. It's like it's an invisible idea that is a philosophical idea. So
That's-
he's not able to grapple with it.
That's precisely the point. He says that anything philosophical is not even worth thinking about. So he will fiddle the figures basically and say, I'm not interested really whether it's nothing or not, because I'm not interested in that. Because but as far as I'm concerned, it's nothing. But even though other people say it is something, I don't care. But that's, as far as I'm concerned, that is dishonest. I mean, you can't ignore something that somebody tells you and just say, well, I'm not going to listen to you because as far as I'm concerned, that something is nothing. So a normal person would come along and say, well, if it's something, it's not nothing. He said, well, I'm not interested in listening to you. As far as I'm concerned, is nothing. And that's dishonest. That's dismissing a whole discipline, right? That's dishonest as far as I'm concerned.
Ideas like the self-consciousness are ideas that are not physical. Like they would define consciousness as something you would have to observe, microscopically, through those machines that can, see brain cells or something, but it doesn't really define what consciousness is.
Correct.
And the idea of a self is also, important, because how would they define what a self is scientifically, right? It has to be something that can be observed empirically, which is what philosophy deals with. It's something that you can just observe physically. It's something invisible. It's macroscopic understanding.
I just happened to see what Emmy typed out, despite the fact I told you not to. The point that science is observable is not, of course, true at all, because the second part, if we ever get to it, will be about what is not observable. We're going to talk about quantum stuff, and that's where philosophy clashes with science, good and proper. So I'm not sure about observable and not observable. Anyway, thank you very much. And now Roland.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of points really on ethics. I suppose the one area I don't think anyone's mentioned, and in relation to sort of art and so forth, is music. And it's not really hard to look through the music industry and find some pretty interesting characters who perhaps would not be considered to be ethically sound. Going back to the Baroque period, and yet we still listen to their music and love it. And indeed, in some respects, I suppose their character, I don't know, I thought someone like Jim Morrison crossed my mind as being a character who it was fairly notorious, and yet his notoriety kind of lends something of a additional quality to his music that a lot of people like. So there's a curious issue there about the nature of the artist and the actual music. It can cut both ways. But the main thing I wanted to say was actually triggered by something Emmy mentioned about abstractions. The concept of ethics is an abstraction in itself. Where does it come from? Where do we? A lot of the things people are talking about here are special cases of ethics. What we might or should think in a particular circumstance. But where do we get the reference that allows us to make those decisions? And this is a question that goes to the root of many issues of ethics and law, of course. I studied jurisprudence under Professor Twining when I was training to be a lawyer. And I remember all year talking about different systems of thought around ethics and rights and wrongs. And he never revealed his position to us until the very end, when we'd all been talking about what law was and how rights appeared. And I remember asking him, well, what do you think? What do you think law is? And he looked at me and he said, well, law is life. And I think he's right. I think that the ethical basis of our decisions does not come from reason at all. It comes from something else. It comes from a sort of the nature of who we happen to be, what we want, essentially, and what we feel is good for us. And that changes, of course, through our life, and people have different views on it. And it resolves, you could say, in a society into a sort of weird compromise that is continually shifting, continually changing. And if you look back, if you look across the world in different societies, even now, you'll see ethical position standpoints that are wildly different from each other. If you look back through history, the same is true. I don't really see why that should change. Why we should be heading towards any sort of singularity of ethical standpoint. I don't really see why. I would say more that ethics will continue to be a sort of resolution of competing wants, really.
Yes, yes. The notion that ethics is something that's stamped onto our nature as something absolute, and that we all agree what ethics is or are, is somewhat strange. And I agree with Roland that when you look around the world, you're wondering where this ethics, where it comes from. Very, very largely, it's to do with the religious way that's still within our society, whether we're religious or not. I think it's been stamped into us. I mean, we all know that we shouldn't kill, and that sounds all right until something happens where it's be killed or kill, and so do not kill doesn't seem to work. Ethics is a very dodgy thing when you start going into it and say, what is it and where does it come from? I think that's what you meant, Ronan. Where does it come from?
Really what I'm saying is that in order to make a decision about whether something is ethically right or wrong, you've got to have some kind of reference against which you can assess it. And where is that reference going to come from? It's not going to be plucked out of thin air or be floating around in the air. It comes from people. It comes from what they want out of their lives and for their families and for their communities and so forth. And it will inevitably be a mixture, a sort of resolution, as I say, of competing forces. And we might all have very strong views on that, but ultimately it's a view. I can't, if I have a very strong ethical view, there's nowhere I can point to say, well, I'm definitely unquestionably right or definitely wrong. There isn't anywhere I can point to, except by reference to what I might call a collective established viewpoint, which will be continually shifting.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many ethical positions that we have now that we didn't have even 50 years ago. In England, race relations legislation, sex discrimination legislation, what happened in the 1970s? Before that, these things worked. It wasn't until 1862 that married women could own property. You know, you can go back in history and see a progression of development, but I can't really see something we're heading towards. I see something which is more like, a cauldron of different ingredients. And those continually change.
Yep. Fine, good. Lucas. Yes, you wanted to say something. Then we're going to get to Fika next, okay? So I remember. Okay. Lucas.
Thanks. I think I've got a few things to say. I'm going to sound, I think, like I'm anti-science in what I'm saying, but I'm really pro-science. I just don't think that it's got like the epistemological or like philosophical interest that's usually attached to it. So I'm going to say something provocative, I think, and then I'm going to try to like back up what I'm suggesting here. I think that we want scientists to be priests, and we want measurement and prediction to be prayer. And we want contact with a non-human reality to be contact with a God that can tell us what we ought to do. my concern here, it actually goes back to something that George raised early. I think that like human beings are like normative creatures. George said something along the lines that we're concerned with justice. I generally agree with that, but I would say it like this: like we're always already in a normative situation. Like human beings are just like, we don't find ourselves in a like a, do I know the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning? Should I put my socks on when I step out of bed or something like that? We kind of just always know what to do. We're always appropriately like in given situations. We're always born into families and societies that provide us with norms to follow. And then from within that set of norms that were provided, culture, in other words, then we go out and do things like set up standards of objectivity and invent sciences and go about attempting to like measure reality, so to speak. It was brought up early on that like science has this moment of like bracketing ethics, and then it would be nice if it like picked ethics back up again and like kind of fused what it is that we like normatively want to do with science with this supposed like claims to like objective reality or something like this. I think this could be equally framed as like science just forgets that human beings operate from this normative framework and then bracket that or presume to step out of that so that we can have these claims of objectivity. And then we just like don't like go about kind of recombining that ethical stance. But primarily, I think that's because scientists forget it, not because like they're like evil or ignorant or something like that, but because they're like highly trained to just like take up the procedure that they're trained into, and then like go about producing the results or that are given by that procedure. And in this respect, I kind of think of like scientists like craftsmen, where they like they're not in the business of like giving us something like a true account of reality. They're in the business of producing heuristics, useful courses of action, one might say. So like it's not on like any scientist's job description anywhere in the world that like you're supposed to provide an account of what's actually real. It's like, no, you're supposed to like follow the method that you're provided and then talk about the results and share the results and attempt to replicate the results. Nowhere is it like a part of the job description that you're like making any kind of contact with reality. So like when we like turn to people like Lawrence Krauss or even like find them problematic in their adjudications about science, I think that we're like honestly giving them too much weight to take them seriously, as if they have anything worthwhile to say, and we're also taking them too seriously as if their derogatory statements about philosophy are serious at all either. They're not in the business of truth, is what I'm trying to say here. So like the idea that like the priest or the scientist is in the business of truth, I think is just not a helpful idea, and I think this is actually a result of like a historical turn in philosophy that was taken with like Locke and Kant, the invention of the mind and the invention of the field of epistemology. There was something said a moment ago, like ethics is abstract. We're like we're more so like in an objective reality. I think it's the reverse. Objectivity, whatever is meant by that, seems like very, very relative and very, very to the specific like verification procedures that a scientist would deploy, and then whatever they mean as far as they share this like standard of objectivity it's an abstract standard that they can go about sharing and presuming to meet. Where they take off from though is this concrete situation, this normative situation that we're all born into and share, and then just forget by the time that we start doing science. And by the time we're doing heuristics, we presume that the heuristics, because they provide us predictive success, that like they're therefore closer to reality than like other discourses.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I think what I'm trying to. Yeah. Sorry to jump on.
No, it's okay. We will see later that science definitely does supposedly go for truth. Science does deal with what it considers to be truth. Whether I agree with it or not is something else. But science definitely tells us what is true. That's the business of science, and we will talk about that if we get to it today. So thank you. And now Fika, yes.
Hi there. I just wanted to make a quick reference to what the topic that you were talking with Michael about, the paintings and.
Could you talk a bit louder, please?
Sure. the topic that you were talking with Michael about buying a painting that is painted with blood. We all use healthcare, don't we? We all go to doctors. We all wait for the newest treatments to come out. We want to live longer. We want to get the best of treatment. Do you ever think when you get a treatment that these treatments have been proven by using them on animals or people in poverty, people that need money, they've been given money to be tested for these treatments? Do any of us actually think about that when we have a loved one that is in danger of death or something like that? So that one point, and then the other one is every time we try this, what has been going around, trendy word for it, the cancel culture. Let's say you have a murderer, but he's an extremely good artist. Every time we ignore that part of this murderer, that part of our society, we're actually hurting ourselves, because we're trying to put something that belongs to us, that makes a difference in our life, in our history, in our future, put it in a box, ignore it, and forget about it. How is that going to help us? This man is a human being. This murderer is a human being. And then the other point, do you think every great person in the history, they have been saints? They're 100% good? I don't believe that, because so many of them, they're all human beings. So many of them, they've done really bad things. They've said really bad things, but either they've been able, either they have not been too horrible what they said or did, or they've been covered up by in so many layers. So after centuries and centuries, we don't see them anymore. A lot of times we tend to decide to ignore all of that to make saints of all these great people. Just my 2 cents. Thank you.
No, there's no doubt that that everybody's flawed. Okay, but there's a difference between being flawed and being a mass murderer. I think there might be a difference.
But isn't that mass murderer a creation of our society, a creation of our race? Isn't that murderer part of us? By ignoring the different parts of that murderer, we're actually ignoring things that make us, that makes another murderer. Why don't we?
Well, that is very, very problematic. And we're talking about we're all part of the same thing. Therefore, if somebody is a murderer, and so are we, because we are part of that. And I personally don't go for that. I can't be responsible for somebody who's a murderer. I can't take it upon myself, and I don't see why I should.
So if you have, God forbid, a disease that you require some kind of treatment, and you know that this treatment has been discovered because it's been tried on animals, there's been a lot of animal cruelty, it's been tried on human beings that haven't been lucky as you and I to be in this place that we are right now, would you still go for that treatment to save your life or to save your loved one's life? Or would you say it's unethical to do that because of where it comes from?
Whichever reason I now give, I will put my foot in it, so I won't answer that question at all. You're asking me if I want to live. Yes, I do. That's all I can say. I can't. How can I answer a question like that? That's a difficult question, and thank you for that. Who has not spoken yet? Akos has not spoken yet. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, hi, Akos.
I'm Akos. It was like so this was like such a heated question that like I lost my train of thought a little bit. But what I wanted to say, it was about the morals and science. That was the thing I wanted to comment on. And I have a bit of a biased, very biased opinion, because I'm both a researcher and religious. So I mean, not religious. I don't think I'm religious, but like I'm following Zen practices, and I think that like kind of counts as one. So like I do feel like there's a order in morals and science, and I think that like a lot of scientific activity is generated by what a person values or what they believe. I don't think that there's like rational science and like soft morals. I feel like that the values and kind of prior beliefs to knowledge makes scientists generate particular kinds of work. If that was a clear thing to say. I don't know if it was understandable what I was saying. I hope so.
No, fine. Thank you. Arif, you haven't spoken yet. Yes, please. Yes, Arif.
Thank you. Yeah,
You're next, Reg.
I was trying to talk on that issue of art made by criminals. I also commented in the chat. So I came across this book by Stephen Reid. He's a prominent bank robber from Canada. He served a lot of jail times, but he wrote this beautiful book called Crowbar in a Buddhist Garden. It's an award-winning book. I loved the book, and I also do not think that art made by a criminal shouldn't be received or should be cancelled. And to answer your Ron, your particular question, if the art we're looking at is made of victims, my opinion on this is, what if the money from this sale is going to the victim's family? I will buy it. What if the money from this sale is going for the rehab of the criminal who did it? I will buy it. But if the criminal is still on loose and if he's still prone to make more killings and the money is still going to him, I won't buy it. So the purchase of this is a different action. Like putting my money is a different action, but I can still like the art. It generates feelings in me. I can connect to the person who made it. That's a different thing. Purchase is another action. That's all.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, Reg. And then Morris.
Yeah, just a couple of discrete points, really. The first one on this question of benefiting from your wrong. I think there's a fairly simple answer in the law here anyway, is that you're not entitled to benefit from your wrong as a general principle. So society can benefit from somebody's wrong, but the individual who perpetrated it can't. And the other thing is, in order to try and discourage unethical behavior, we, in the process of determining questions where information has been obtained unethically, we don't take that into account. Again, subject to just how unethical it is. So I think there's a pretty good guidelines there. And the other one is that I think with the question of science, I think we need to think that the sort of domain of scientific investigation is actually quite small in life experience, in our lives as a whole. So although we may think about what the principles are of science, we shouldn't forget that most of our life doesn't have very much to do with science, and in the case of some lives, very little at all. So there's a huge questions which are outside science and can never be the subject of scientific theorizing, epistemology, if you like. So just a couple of discrete points.
Okay, thank you. Okay, 1 minute. Dana's jumping up and down there. Dana, go for it.
I just real quick want to speak to most of us don't interact with science at all, and there's virtually nothing that you touch, put on your body, or bathe with, or the water that bathes you that isn't touched by science and interacting with you. It's just a matter of whether or not you're cognitive of it. So I want to go back to this idea of the Nazi camps, and I only can speak from the United States. So abortions became legal, embryonic tissue became available, science exploded. Anti-abortionists or pro-life said, oh, this is unethical, it's unethical, this is unethical, it's unethical. And so everybody said, okay, they win. However, the cells that were already available were allowed to be stayed in the scientists' hands. And thank God. Why? Because now the very first really effective treatment, the monoclonal treatment, is from that cell from the 1970s, aborted embryo tissue. And that's how they're able to clone and do the monoclonics. And the same is true for the vaccinations that came out the most rapidly for COVID-19. And so then we look at ethics and we have to stand back and say, all right, what's happening in this society that they deem something ethical or non-ethical? And so if we look at the Nazi camp, and we're going to also talk about art instead of science, we had the lampshades made of human skin and the parchment and paper. And these were prized possessions after the war. They were not thrown away. They were not rejected. They were repulsive, right? Yes, maybe, no. Right down to shrunken heads when found. Archaeology digs. The fascinations with the crypt that was meant to be sacred and untouched. And we put it on display. So we have these very, very fickle ideas, very fickle as human beings, especially as we move through time, millennia, centuries, so fickle. And I think I'll leave it at that. Oh no, there was one more, I'm sorry. And that is, I keep hearing science is measurable and it's exacting and this sort of thing. And I keep coming back in the chat room and saying, no, there's data that is collected, that is subjective. It cannot be observed. For example, medications, nausea is not observable. You can think you're observing it, but is it real or not? You don't know. So there's no particular measurable symptom to know whether or not what you're being told is true. So we have to some point, accept that we're going to take in subjective information. The same is true when we're studying any sociology or the philosophy. We can look at justice and bring it all the way around, justice, science, ethics, philosophy, when we're looking at what the outcomes of allowing violence, just horrific violence, automatic gunfire all night. I have a friend living in it, and it's horrifying.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you. Maurice,
Thank you.
You've been very patient.
As always.
Yes, true.
I just want to say a couple of very, very quick, small things. I hear both you, Ronnie, and Fika struggling over the idea of art and morality and so on, with different points of view from different directions. And it just seems to me that the struggle over it is about behavior. That is to say, as we might say to a small child, I completely reject your behavior. You behave disgustingly, but I still love you. And if we regard other human beings as an object for love, then even though their behavior may be completely unacceptable, we still maintain our love for them as human beings. So the objects of art, for instance, that they produce are maybe good bits of behavior, and the mass murders that they do are very bad, they are still human beings, and we still maintain within us a love for them somewhere or other. The other thing I wanted to say is, I think maybe you're making it easy on us in this discussion to discuss art and decide whether we should accept it if it's done by somebody who is, let's call it, immoral. That's a very nice thing to just discuss theoretically. But what about politicians? Politicians are expressing things which affect our lives every day. And there are politicians, leaders all over the world who, on the one hand, are wicked, and on the other, seem to do good things for their people, their countrymen. And we are all, from time to time, faced with this problem of, now, do I vote for so-and-so because he's really a nasty, wicked, evil person, but he has reduced my taxes recently, so that's maybe he's good after all. I mean, the decisions that we make are not about buying art. I don't know how many of us buy an awful lot of art. I personally don't really, but on the other hand, I'm asked. I have to find a political position. I have to find something that I can follow, something that I can support. And do I support that person? What a horrible person he is. On the other hand, I do rather like his policies or hers.
It's a very good point, Maurice, because when I mentioned art, I actually thought of politics, but I did make it easy. You're right, because I thought if I'd put in what you just said, that everybody would immediately think of certain people, and I did not want to get into that. But now that you mention it, I'm not going to get into it. On the other hand, it is something that has been exercising me, that can a really horrible, evil person do good things? I don't have an answer to that, by the way. I don't have an answer to that. Although I assume only inside myself that a really, really evil person cannot do good things. I cannot disassociate one for the other. I would always think there's some ulterior motive, something in that person that's so bad through and through that doing something good I can't accept. That might be me, but I've been grappling with that particular question that you've been, and I put it into art, but that's what I really meant.
But relate that, please. But please relate that to the first thing that I said, which is about rejecting behavior and accepting the other human being because we love each other.
Well, I don't love everybody. That's the difference between
and
us.
Let me tell you that they don't all love you.
Okay, fair enough. I want to move on, but there's still people, so we're going to do another. We're going to go to. Oh, I see. Bill's got his hand up. James got his hand up, and George and oh crumbs. I wanted to actually move on. It's not going to. Okay, so we're going to do James Cook. Right? Yes, James.
It's up to you. It's up to you if you want to break the subject, because I was probably going to do that too. Somebody else was talking about truth. The idea of like a person who has defective behavior that does something that's potentially consequential for society. The mad artist. So I mean, there is a philosopher that comes to mind. It's Heidegger, who has some detractors that say that because some of us, not only did he actually participate in quote unquote Nazism by being a rector, but he and that was closely allied with the Nazi Party, but he also wrote in his philosophy things that probably helped or exacerbated people doing things that were part of the Holocaust. So in other words, treating people as resources. They could, in a certain sense, you could call Heidegger a patron saint of human relations. So, since the being in time is all about resources and being one who's capable of marshaling resources as equipment, quote unquote. So, or useful things. There's another translation that says the equipment is useful things. So, and obviously to a manager, people are useful things. So, and also to talk about defect, the purpose of defects in society, what it means, and so forth. So this whole idea that philosophy could go the opposite way of social justice is an important one, because the philosophy can fold back and be a judge of social justice, or be a judge of human activity into either art or philosophy and so forth. So the different frames of human activity fold back on each other and judge each other. But in the end, if you were a philosopher and you're going to judge whether or not to pay attention to Heidegger's philosophy, that would not very much have to do, I would think, with your opinion of Nazism. In other words, if you're a philosopher and you're really interested in answers and truth, you're not going to edit yourself and not participate in a thorough study of the history of philosophy or anything like that. So that's just one of the things I was going to talk about, is that this idea that we can't judge, that we have to judge people's behavior badly. Well, yes, we can judge it badly, but it doesn't determine the future. It doesn't have to completely determine the future. Van Gogh hacking his ear off, doesn't determine the future of art as a medium, painting as a medium. Everything in that is a behavior is not it doesn't have to be a complete end of an end of that stream, in that life stream.
That's a very good point, James, about Heidegger. I was going to come to that. Terry, no, I did not notice you had your hand up, but I'm coming to you next. Okay, I just want to make a point about Heidegger. It's a very, very good point. I grapple with that particular point. Heidegger was a great philosopher, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, and I study him, read him a lot. Makes a lot of sense, but I cannot. Now and again, it flashes through my mind what that person was, and it bothers me when I think about it, when I'm reading him, and sometimes I try and connect what that person was with what he says, and it's very, very difficult for me to realize that that is the same person. And I'm pleased you brought that up, because that is a very, very good example. Another one, Roland spoke about music, is Wagner, who was an out-and-out rabid anti-Semite, Nazi, etc., whose music is beautiful. I can't reconcile that at all. I just can't. But his music represents his ideas in music about the German race, etc., etc. That's the way of putting it out in music. That is his music. Whereas Heidegger, I can't see the connection. Although there's a lot have been written about it, I can't feel the connection. Whereas I do with Wagner. And Wagner for me is not something that I particularly go for, because of that. Not because I don't think it's beautiful, because it just goes against the grain. So thank you. That's a very good point about Heidegger. Very good point. Oh yeah, Terry. Sorry, I didn't notice you had your hand up.
Just a couple quick comments on two items. I've never seen a painting that was made with human blood, but I have seen a massive display of art in the DC area made of people, apparently innocent people, who had been flayed into artwork. The Chinese display where they took criminals who had been executed and made them into living, I don't know what you call it. That was on display. I paid to go in.
Oh yeah,
It was available. You could see, I saw it walk by and said, what is that? And I didn't realize they were real people at first. And my understanding is the crimes they were committed for which they were executed, are not executable crimes in the vast majority of the world. So no blood paintings, but some other very real examples. And I think, I once read a science fiction book called Martian Go Home, in which Martians invaded the Earth and started telling everybody everything they had done wrong in their life. No one was immune. And I think we, as we said, we do pretend in many, many levels that our lives and our existence are not dependent on unbelievable amounts of misery, deaths, hardship for various people, animals, take your choice. So that's a hard question. I'm not saying there's an easy answer for it, but it's a really hard question. And that's why we need philosophy. My second point is, please, science is good at, yes, please, science is good at getting rid of superstition, showing there's no connection, that you shouldn't kill somebody because you think that they have an evil eye. It is good for that. Please do not give ethics over to scientists. It attracts people. I live with scientists, I work with scientists, I am a scientist. It tends to attract a group of people who rather would get away from emotions and rather get away from social interaction and would just as soon shuffle it aside and let someone else deal with it. If you allow us as scientists to guide society, you will have catastrophe, because you're going to give it over to people who really don't care or understand on the whole, and in a process which increases that to the nth degree. They've done studies in which people would be told to torture someone, and sometimes they would add screams, sometimes they wouldn't. It wasn't real torture. What they found is, in a scientific environment, people are extremely obedient because they're finding facts. They're finding facts, and that will excuse incredible, horrible behaviors in most people's minds. There must be a framework that is broader than science, and to encompass and to deal with these issues, and to deal with what is the value of human life, what is the value, to how do we navigate these incredibly difficult problems that Mika and Michael and Fika so aptly put up. These are very hard questions, but please don't give them to the scientists. And I say this speaking to someone very much immersed in science and who thinks science is incredibly valuable. But we have to be careful on how we make those decisions. The value of humans and the values of other people, I think if we abandon that, then we're lost no matter what we do. Philosophy, religion, science, none of it matters if you get to that point. If you become the ultimate carnivore, in which the only person that matters is your own self, then you're already in trouble. And we have to have something more than that. And I think philosophy is just an incredibly important part of that. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sorry, George, you've been waiting a long time, but there are lots of people. So it's your turn.
No worries. Thank you very much. So something that Roland was talking about, this idea of, the source of ethics. And Ron, you said something, oh, it's religion. And it can't be religion. I mean, in other words, when you look at the very notion of human evolution, human evolved precisely because we know killing other human beings is wrong. And I say no in an objective sense. I mean, this notion of ethics, I could tell you for a fact that ethics is real. Ethics is objective. Why do I say that? Because we know what we talk about, right? We can agree on the ethical problems, right? I mean, if I said to you, well, the ethics of tying my shoe, you're going to be like, well, George, you're an idiot. I mean, we agree on the problems. And just like really, in some ways, philosophy and science are of one piece, because science is really problem driven, right? We look at certain things because we deem them important. We deem them not important to know something about it. Again, ethics is the same way, or morality, right? So there is an objectivity there, right? And again, it's found in that we can identify the problems. Now, of course, science and philosophy are different insofar as the kind of answers you come up with, right? And there can be reasonable philosophical disagreement, right? But the idea that justice, that ethics, that morality is not objective. I mean, that's part of the problem that I think we have in this society, is that, the scientists can dismiss in part ethical moral questions because we privilege scientific knowledge, when indeed we should not. I mean, the almost, people have been hinting at this, like the least important issues before us in some ways are scientific, right? What's the mind? How to be happy? How to be an authentic person, right? These are the things that indeed dominate our lives, dominate our consciousness. It's not to say science isn't important, but the idea and the myth and the idea that science somehow precedes philosophy or is more important than philosophy. I mean, that was one of our profound failures of our society, just even in terms of global warming. Global warming in no way is a scientific technological problem. Global warming is profoundly a philosophical political problem, right? It is political and philosophical first and foremost. Only in a secondary sense is it scientific or technological, right? So, again, I go back and I'm just going to conclude on this point, which is to say that, again, that the questions of morality and ethics are very objective. And I offer this one last piece of evidence, which is the notion of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It tells us that there is something very real and objective to the notion of morality, to the notion of ethics, the idea that people are so tortured over their moral and ethical decisions that they can't live, that they commit suicide over them, right? Tells us that morality and ethics is objective. Last point, popular culture. I, as a researcher, look at popular culture to determine what is objective ethics, what is objective morality, what is objective justice.
We're going to move on to Moshe and then Debbie, but before that, I have a feeling, I might be wrong, that Roland has got something to say about objective ethics. Am I right, Roland?
Yeah, I mean, that's where does the objectivity come from? I can understand that from time to time in our history, we evolved new ways of looking at how our societies would work. But these are all based upon the nature of the people. I don't see anything outside the people that we can refer to. Nature is a violent and hungry place where things eat each other and kill each other. People have been killing each other for years in order to defend their particular beliefs. So it certainly isn't objective to say that thou shalt not kill. In fact, quite the reverse. Different tribal identities make it
Wait a second. Hold on a second.
a
Hold on that point.
Wait, let him, George, let him finish, please.
Sorry.
It seems pretty clear that different cultural identities, when they find themselves to be incompatible for some reason, and that might be because they're at war or for various other reasons, have no hesitation in prioritizing their own lives over others. So this idea that life has some universal human value is not really supported by anything. It's something that we like the idea of ourselves, maybe, because we see that as something that binds our communities together. But when it comes to wars, when it comes to disagreements at a level where fatality becomes the only option, people don't hesitate to pull the trigger.
You're looking at two different questions. You're looking at
1 second, George, hang on. We got to move on, but we've got some people waiting, and they must say before we move on to AI, where Terry, if you can adjust your sound a bit, it's not coming out very clearly, Terry.
Well, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but very sort of faint and funny. But
can you hear me better now?
Yes. Okay,
Yeah,
so
just need to post-
in a minute. So now it's Moshe. Thank you for waiting. Sorry, lots of people.
Thank you. The 2 points. I think Terry's point was very seminal. We cannot, speaking as a philosopher, we cannot leave ethical decisions to scientists because they're not concerned with ethics, and there are rights and wrongs. What has been of particular interest to me is the tension represented by the positions of Fika and Michael, because Michael is saying that, well, the art is separate from the artist, and Fika is bringing up the point of well, if this particular cure was created by a terrible person, we have to ask the question of whether or not it's right or wrong. Should we accept it? And Ron, you even graciously begged the question of answering that yourself. Yes, of course I want to live, but that tension there reminds me that we have sort of a dual consciousness. We speak as philosophers, and we speak as individuals whose morals are probably improved because we have studied philosophy. And those people who are professional philosophers know that when we study philosophy, we always do it independent of the cultural situation that the philosopher was in, or the historical situation that the philosopher was in, and we study them just for themselves so that we can have, Kant talking to Plato and Heidegger talking to Spinoza and whatever other combinations you want to put out there. But as human beings, well, let me get to my punchline. We, as philosophers, are indebted for our craft to a criminal who was executed by society. Socrates was a criminal, corrupted the youth, and was put to death by the Athenians. But still, his philosophical tradition continues on. So I've loved this conversation because it really points out how, as individuals who have been informed by philosophy, we have a refined moral sense, and we must take that refined moral sense and apply it to social, political, and scientific questions. And there are some cases where the art or the philosophy, even though it has come from a criminal, is of such importance that it must be considered from a philosophical standpoint. But as individuals, we must stand back and say, no, that's either for me or that's not for me. Thank you.
Before I move on to Debbie, I just want to say how interesting it is that you said that Socrates, what did he do to the youth? He corrupted the youth, and that's why he was executed. Well, that is a very interesting way of looking at it, because that's what the reason was that they gave for executing him, because that's what he was doing. But really, what was he doing? He was going around. Imagine me now in a white sheet, wandering around and bugging you and asking you all sorts of stupid questions, and then you come along and say, look, this bloke he's corrupting us. This first Sunday of the month is terrible. There's this bloke wandering around, he's just asking questions, he's driving us crazy. We've got to get rid of him, we're going to bump him off. All Socrates did was to go around bothering people and asking them stupid questions. And the leaders said, look, we've got to get rid of this bloke, he's asking questions, he's corrupting the youth. And they executed him. But you said, interestingly, that he corrupted youth. It just goes to show how subjective everything is. It's a very interesting way of looking at history, by the way, yours is. But that's a very, very good example of why we're all here doing what we're doing. And now, Debbie, thank you for waiting.
Thank you. Well, I think I've just come actually to stress what Terry said about the connection with morality, ethics, and science, and what Moshe just said, how science has no morality. Not that it's immoral, but it's amoral. I mean, science is there to test, to observe, and to experiment, and to check what there is. Or there's technology, the usage, I think I said that last time, the usage of technology is only done or dictated by morality. I mean, we've got the technology to, which was a turning point in history, to ruin the whole world and to kill all humanity, but we're not doing it. And I think, science can check and observe. Excuse me, Alma, Kucha, sorry, I'm not alone, sorry. And so we do have the technology to experiment on humans. We can do, we can check brains and do terrible or not terrible experiments on humans. And the only thing that is actually stopping science is ethics, is philosophy, is the question whether this ought to be checked, this ought to be tested. I think part of the reason that there's so much misinformation, sorry, that we have the big social media technologies that did not have morality, and I'm echoing myself. Anyway, you hear the echo?
Yes.
Yeah, you've got feedback.
Oh.
It's coming from Anna. And Anna, you can tell if the green rectangle lights up, that's the person with the feedback. It's Anna.
Okay. Now it's okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the I think now scientists and the engineers that are actually influencing everything we know about the world, they should have ethical or moral principles, but not only principles, but education. So the reason that now we are exposed to anything and all false information, and that it's okay to be exposed and to be influenced by lies, and to not know the difference between science or pseudoscience, is because engineers did not have any ethical thought behind their engineering, and now it's coming out. And so I agree completely agree with Terry that scientists and engineers, now it's engineers, they have to have ethical upbringing and philosophical courses. It has to be part of being a scientist. I mean, even doctors, they have to go through an ethical course, and so that's basically something I'm very. It's important. I can see how the lack of ethical and philosophical background in policymakers and engineers and scientists, how this is a problem. And especially maybe now it was mentioned, and I'll put my foot in with vaccinations. It is not the problem with science, actually, and it's a problem that we need actually philosophy to explain why science works. It's because the problem is we don't believe scientists, not because of the science, because something there, the context of the scientists is lost. It can be trust, it can be truth, it can be anything, but it's apart, it's detached from science. And that also would like to relate to what George said about objectivity. It doesn't mean that I'm promoting objectivity, that we need some sort of objective ethics, because I'm also quite skeptical about that concept, but I would probably use a more pragmatic approach. It's what works, what the ethical approach that works. What is pragmatic, what is useful. I would go more for that, because it always depends on the context. And as Roland said, it depends on the culture, it depends on the country, it depends on the humans that define that ethical principle or theory or whatever. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move up. I really need to move on a bit. Claudio, do you have anything to say of absolute importance on this particular topic? The answer.
Well, I'll try to be very quick. We've been talking strictly about the ethics, how it's compatible with science. But what about the philosophy is also compatible? Is that it engages critically with science in regards to methodology, the evidence, the results, etc. Where science is implicit, philosophy could be more explicit. And also, philosophy helps science because it brings it to a larger audience, different professionals, and oftentimes to the general population, because it uses a language that is more understandable. Like scientists, it's more narrow because he uses mathematical equations and other aspects of science. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on, but Anna, you've got your hand up, but I can't see you. What does that mean? Anna? Okay. Anna? No. Okay. So we're going to move on one little bit. It's still on ethics, and I want to speak about something very something that we all think about and not know that much about, which is artificial intelligence. And I'm pleased that we got Terry here, who can correct me when I'm wrong. So AI, which is quite something. So there is no AI without knowing how humans work. If there's a part of science that's all philosophy, what's behind it has to be AI. It has to be an ethical thing. What is this, and what do we actually want? How do we make AI work if we don't know how humans work? After all, they are based on what humans do. And when do we stop robots thinking? When robots do things that we no longer understand, when they've reached that point that they do things that we don't understand, we're already, I think, past it. At that point, what do we do? So there are dangers. There are lots and lots and lots of dangers. I know that Terry has mentioned this a few times for those who've been here before. I'm give you two big examples of very, very big ones about, for example, AI collects and processes information, right? And alerts decision makers to potential flashpoints. I'm talking about big now. Now, that's a force for good. If it buys politicians more time to assess the threat, but not if the data has been poisoned, not if spoof videos are being amplified by AI to suggest an imminent attack. Let me give you an example. If several nuclear power plants in China registered false positive safety reports leading to their shutdown and the paralysis of the grid. Now, what if China considered it was being cyber attacked and put themselves on a war footing? Now, they don't know anything about it, but everything's being shut down and they're on a war footing. Now, what happens then when let's say the US or wherever it is sees that China's gone on a war footing? It means that the United States will go on a war footing. And nobody knows why it happened. As far as the US is concerned, China's gone on a war footing. As far as China's concerned, they've been cyber attacked. Where do we, this is enormous. And it's got nothing anymore to do with humans, right? The second one is that it's another example of the working assumption of US intelligence is that the Russian military have the ability to inject fake data into AI-driven algorithms of the US military at an early stage. The point is to prevent American AI systems from being able to recognize Russia as an aggressor in future conflicts. So AI is an essential tool in predicting trouble, but while keeping us secure, it also exposes us. And that's the way we live now. We live on a tightrope. Instead of crazy people that we might or might not be able to deal with, we're dealing now with crazy machines that we don't even know they're crazy until they become crazy. And can philosophers stop the madness of AI? That is the question. We're talking about philosophy. Can they stop it? Will thought prevail over scientific progress? And now we come to a real philosophical question. What is progress? What is progress? Have we progressed? Have we progressed that we are now in danger of destroying ourselves and we don't even know it? Where is the progress here? I think I'll just move on a little bit. Those are things that you might want to think about while we're still here before everything explodes. Who knows? It could happen any second. But you see, we won't know, so we're okay. What about robots and rights? We mentioned this once. If humans have got rights, why wouldn't robots have rights? Robots with feelings. How do we know that robots have feelings? I mean, we can make robots look as though they have feelings. We can make them cry. We can cuddle them because they look so cute, right? Well, are they pretending to have feelings? And why is that different from people who pretend to have feelings? Why is that different? Why a psychopath has no feelings, but a psychopath has rights? Why don't robots have rights? Okay, there's the hard problem of qualia. If robots recognize colors, why is that different to humans recognizing colors and feelings? How is that different? Humans are limited because they care, right? Robots don't care, and so potentially are unlimited. That's those are big problems, I think. And Terry, which of those are exaggerated of all the things I said? I can't hear you. Can't.
Sorry, I just had mute on that time. That was quite a collection, so it'd be a little difficult to decide which one to pick on. I will pick on one point. We are nowhere near producing general intelligences that can make decisions, go in a direction. So what we have now are amplifiers. And that will be the state for I think for quite some time. Those are already incredibly dangerous. I would argue that much of the incredible turmoil going on here in the US right now, and still ongoing, by the way, was precipitated, at least in part, by poor use of computer technology, networking technology, not necessarily AI, but one of the participants was the dumbest form of AI imaginable in huge numbers, which are just little bots that pretend to be people. You don't have to have a lot of sentience to do that, especially if you're screaming profanities. You can just create a little bot that says, oh, that got people upset. I'm going to make 1 million of those, and pretend that those are fellow citizens all chiming in that it's time to lynch the vice president or whichever, although I don't think bots were involved in that particular one, but that's where we're at these days. So the amplification factor of telecommunications in general, aided by AI, I think is the most treacherous area that we have, and is where we need people to think through these issues individually. Someone mentioned individually we have good people. That is always true. There's people who are good scientists, but that's part of humanity. The trouble is, if you disinfect a surface, I'll use a bacterial analogy. I hate to do that for people, but nonetheless, there's some correspondence. If you disinfect a surface and kill every bacteria on it, guess which ones come back first? The nastiest ones. Guess which is the most stable ones, in which you have a population in which you have a balance, and it is a considered population where there's been interaction, understanding among the bacteria at a literal chemical level. To me, the philosophy side comes in there. It's not that we don't have good people. We certainly absolutely do in everything, and philosophy will not give you goodness. But we do have to have discussions, social interactions, ethical discussions, a general consideration of what are we doing? And if we don't do that, that's where we get in great trouble. And scientists, again, we're not very good at that. Commercially, Facebook and Twitter arguably have helped potentially introduce the new dark age. Those are very hard to get out of once you get into them, because they said, hey, I get more money and more clicks if you click on it. And if people get angry, I get more clicks. It was pure profit motive. Nobody thought about the long-term consequence. And the consequences have already caused tens of thousands of deaths, minimum. I would argue the number is actually much higher than that. So we need to be quick as a human race to think about what we're doing, both with AI, the AI technologies, and telecommunications in general, I think. Just the ability to all of us talk to each other instantaneously is perhaps the deeper threat. So that's what I would tend to lock on as some of the issues with that. And they are going to get worse. The amplification continues. And the fake videos are the new thing that's coming out over the next few years. That's going to be fun. It already is fun. So.
Okay, thank you. Augustine and then Bill.
Yes, so this is such an interesting topic. Thank you so much, Ron, for raising up. I'm glad I'm talking after Terry, because otherwise I will feel like, oh my gosh, talking in front of an expert is going to be quite a challenge. I'm not an expert on artificial intelligence, but I have studied the topic from philosophy, and I think the real problem. Someone has also said, James Green has said in the chat, robots also without AI are still very dangerous. Yes, that's correct. But I think, as one of my teachers in this topic said, the problem is that whether they are robots with AI or simple AIs, they have become, in our society, moral agents. The point that they do take decisions that are morally good or wrong and that affect people's. And so that is quite the ethical challenge that we have with AI, that they take a decision and it could cost the life of someone. And the self-autonomous car, for example, can take a decision whether to stop or crash someone, or but there are thousands of examples. I don't want to bore in the public with that, but definitely they are moral agents, and that's what we have to deal with in ethics.
Right. Yeah, Bill, yes.
It helps me to distinguish between engineering and science. AI is a runaway problem of engineering. It's not an issue of science, nor is it an issue of imitation of humans. It's a technology source that impersonates humans, but isn't. And I think that's an important thing, because rather than say they're imitating and acting like humans, they're technologies that do things differently. And we can control them as engineering objects and not bring all to bear the issue of whether they're like humans. They're not. They're engineering objects. And we can have controls on those in the same way we have controls on everything else. We need to develop a consensus like we do with law, like we do with ethics, to say these kinds of impersonations, engineering-wise, have to stop. They have to be controlled. They have to be a object of policy, and they're not. And it seems to me that that's where the society has to come together and say, this has to end. Zuck cannot be creating algorithms that addict us to our own preferences and put us in bubbles and keep us there. And if that's happening, that's got to change. That's a question of policy, not of imitation of humanity or whether there's a mind inside the machine. It's a bad engineering choice that has to change because the consequences, and again, this is the science question that informs, or ethics that are informed by science, the consequences are too threatening, and we have to have policy to stop the threats.
Bill, if I could inject real quickly, because I very much agree with that, and I am an advocate that it should be a felony with a multi-year jail sentence to imitate a human being with the intent of fooling someone. And I would like to see every single instance where someone puts out a fake bot pretending to be a human for the specific purpose of fooling people into doing something, that would be an actual felony, not a misdemeanor, felony. That is the level of dissonance we have between what's going on and what should be going on, because to allow an inanimate entity to pretend to be a human, to persuade other humans, is a terrible moral disgrace of unbelievable proportions, and yet people are not fully aware of how disgraceful of a decision is because we kind of fell into it. And we need to have more outrage that this is being done, exactly the type you're talking about. It's a technology that is being used in an extremely immoral fashion. And I think there could be a broad consensus if people think of what that means to each one of us individually and say, I don't want to be persuaded by a non-human entity thinking that it is. I think most of us would tend to agree with that. But legally, and this often is a problem with fast-moving technology areas, legally, the systems lag by years or decades. And I don't know an easy solution for that. It's a tough problem, but we are way behind the curve.
Thank you, Terry.
James, you're next. I just want to make a comment here, okay? Since when have all countries come to an agreement about something that's wrong and they're going to stop it? I mean, when has that ever happened? I mean, you're speaking like we're all sitting around together around the fire, and we're going to decide, you know what? We're not going to work on hydrogen bombs. Hey, how about that? It's immoral. Yeah, you're right. It's immoral. We're now going to decide we're going to have a law. Nobody's going to develop a bomb. Well, that worked, didn't it? Now, who is going to sit around saying, you know, this is really dangerous and we mustn't do it, because if we do it, then it's not fair because, you know, there are other countries who are not doing it and we don't want to do anything against other countries. So let's all decide that we're not going to work on it anymore. Now, when has that ever happened? When is it ever going to happen? We are developing the worst kind of weapons possible, from nuclear to gas to just name it. And people are not sitting around and saying this is terrible, let's stop. Nobody's going to stop this. Nobody's going to do it just because we say, yeah, it's very, very bad. But the people in power do things that are very, very bad. They do it. They've always done it, and they always will. I don't see what you're proposing. I mean, I see it, and I agree. But how are you going to do it? And when you say, I think it was Terry said that that it's very dangerous that we're controlled, or one of you said that, very dangerous that we're controlled by inanimate things, but we are already controlled by them. The algorithms are controlling us. We're all being controlled by the media. We're told what to buy. We are fed stuff from people that we think all agree with us, but that's only because we're in a particular bubble and that we're fed in, and where everybody agrees, but they don't. We are being fed adverts that we don't want, etc., etc. We are being controlled right now. If you want to stop that, that's very, very good. I agree with you. And if you want to go further and say, I want to stop robots, and I don't like robots copying people. But if a robot comes into your home and you don't know that it's a robot, and you'll say, oh, that's very, very naughty. Who did that? But you won't even know. And that's what it's going to come to. Terry, surely you see that we're moving towards that.
Well, Ron, one of the things I would put as a suggestion why there might be a distinction between, for instance, weapons development and the false presentation of being a human being is oddly enough, and I've seen this happen in places I didn't expect, large corporations in which you have multiple interests and they're all competing for the same market will attack each other in cases like that. If one of them is using a technique like that, another one will get upset with that. And they can, in some cases, when you have multiple powers and a diversity of the power base, and it's not concentrated in one sole source, you can get some interactions that I think tend to favor more reasonable rules of the road for participation with that. Right now, we're having billion-dollar lawsuits against Fox News for flagrant, repeated, unrelenting lies. They're not distortions, they're not interpretations, just flat out lies. And they're being sued for a few $1 billion. Now, I dread the thought that we get to a point where the corporations are the higher ethical standard for what's going on. That's a scary thought, just even saying it. And yet we're actually seeing, because there's multiple ones of them, that they do balance each other out sometimes and will go to war with each other. And for certain things, especially in the interaction for the market and for people's minds, where they will fight each say, we're not going to do that. Or I'm not going to let you do that. So I think there is a distinction between like the weapons development versus social interaction, because the social mind is so valuable to so many people that it's not easily just abandoned by all of those different competing groups. So for whatever it's worth, I think there is some potential. I could actually see legislation going on where they would ban, saying you can't just pretend for the explicit person a false representation of being a human. Because that is just that. I mean, if you're pretending to be a human and you're not, that is a human who made that decision, and that's a bad thing to do. So I think they could say, well, you do that, it's not the robot that goes to jail, it's not the software that goes to jail, you go to jail for doing that. You know, it's not a good idea. So I don't think it's easy. I put that as a hypothetical, but I also don't think it's totally impossible that we could at least get to a better place than some of that. I hope we do something better than what we're doing.
Well, I know people who are pretty robot-like, but I don't know if I can ban them. James, sorry for keeping you waiting.
Yeah, thank you. I think the idea that Terry originally gave of penalizing people for creating bots that caused actions or that fooled other people, it's kind of like it's if the consequences were a crime, then I would agree. If it's not a crime, then it doesn't really matter that much. On the other hand, there could be civil suits. In other words, I think legally the way it would wash out is if somebody created a robot that caused you to miss income or to cause your business to fail or something like that, then you would have the opportunity to sue that person. So I think there's probably already laws that work that way. In other words, there's causality in law. If you are the one that causes someone's business to fail, or you are the one that causes the Capitol to be attacked on January 6th, you're likely to be in the FBI's crosshairs already. They don't need specific laws that target artificial intelligence to indict the culpable, I don't think. This general sort of like fear of all the consequences of AI and all the consequences of masquerade. In other words, virtual masquerade. We masquerade on the internet, by using multiple accounts and by putting algorithms behind our behind accounts, which we call bots. That's to me, that's a question of capitalism. In other words, if you are buying a product such as Twitter or Facebook or Google is another one. I keep finding things that I search for showing up on my TV screen, my YouTube screen and things like that, and Google owns all of that. They own the search and they own the YouTube, so that's why I get these surprises like, wow, I wanted to find out what such and such was, and here I got videos about it on YouTube. It's like being offered to me. So it's kind of disturbing because I already know that. I don't need YouTube's assistance on this. So, although I'm glad that YouTube understands that I love Hegel. I mean, that really helps a lot. So I'm very happy about it. Yeah. So in other words, I'm very pro AI. I am completely on the side of AI. And if anyone is against AI, don't stop buying AI. Just don't buy that product, because any AI product that's built to work as designed, in other words, it's built for purpose. AI products, just like any other products, need to be built for purpose. If you find that it's not built for purpose or built, to suit you, just don't buy the product. Go to another platform. Don't stop using Twitter.
Okay. Michael and then Roland. That's who we've got. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, I just think the conversation is very interesting. I believe AI is just a tool, but I feel like we do have a responsibility for it. Google made its company motto, "Do not be evil," like for the sole purpose of knowing that they know that what their tool is doing is learning from you. So whatever you're addicted to or whatever truth you believe, they expand that and it creates a false bias. And you do live in that bubble that you're talking about. But I do think it's just a tool. There's actually a good documentary called The Social Dilemma. And it talks about how like all these companies, Twitter, Google, Facebook, have hired engineers to make the platform as addictive as possible. So you keep coming back. But there's a negative space about it right now because of a false truth or false reality. So a lot of people go into these ideals, but they are repeatedly fed the same ideals, so they start believing it's true. And that's the part of AI where I feel like it's very negative and could be very detrimental to us as a whole. Because instead of learning from what we're doing right now, like we're all talking to each other, learning from different points of views, people will just be attached to their phone and being fed the same information because of capitalism. And that's the only negative part I think about it. But at the end of the day, it is just a tool.
Okay, thank you. Roland.
I suppose this is a kind of a thread maybe that I see in this issue about AI, and also tallies with what Michael's just said, and also what was said earlier about, I think by Dana, about I suppose provenance of the things that we buy. One of the things that I'm aware of in this debate about the impersonation of people, the expression of points of view, the supply of information, is that the information is generally not within the power of an individual to test out. And this has been something that I suppose has interested me for some years now, that we have, if we go back, 100 or a couple of 100 years, we were not in a world where information was that untestable. Most of the information that was relevant to people's lives was actually directly testable because it was local and fairly easy to do. But now we have a lot of people's lives are affected and influenced by information that they have no ability to test at all. And so in some ways, this idea of exploiting that has become quite a popular idea. It's exploited in marketing, has been for decades and decades. And I guess this idea of impersonating people is just another level of the exploitation of the inability of people to test whether the information they're being supplied is accurate or not. I think it's a big problem in a world of information. And I think probably if this particular gap is stopped up in some way, another one will appear as well, because fundamentally, we're dealing with the reliability or accuracy of information. If it is stopped up by some sort of penal legislation, then where does the question of reliability of facts come in? We already have fact checkers on Facebook and so forth. Who is going to check the facts of the fact checkers and so forth? It's just an interesting area, this whole question about how dependent we now are on information, and how really we have had to delegate the ability to check that information to sources that we trust. And why do we trust them? I don't know. So that's what I have to say about information.
That's absolutely right. Okay. Yeah, Terry, yes.
Well, if I could comment on a little bit about one of the reasons why this has got to be an emotional issue for me, and I fully admit that, is I have seen members of my own extended family go from essentially rational thinking to utter chaos within a period of months as a result of being addicted to the internet and turning that into the sole source of their information. There is something terrifying going on with this. And I saw some good comments about not criminalizing. Actually, I agree with that. I think maybe we criminalize too much, but we do need the framework of law and the rules of society, the agreements are part of that mapping about how you navigate so that people can exchange ideas more freely. But what we always need to do is actually encourage the exchange of honest ideas more freely and to focus more on the human beings. What I don't like is to see my own technology base being used to pretend to be humans, because that's where we get in trouble. That's where people in my extended family lose track of reality, is when they stop talking to their neighbors and they stop talking to the person next door and instead listen to a podcast. So we have to have that human connection and realize this is mostly a fantasy, folks, including even to some degree what we're doing right here. We don't absolutely know the details of the technology communications there. Zoom is nice because it gives a good real-time thing, but we have to be careful about getting immersed in internet psychosis of thinking the internet's our first reality. It is not. It's our next door neighbors, it's our family, it's our community. And if we lose that, it doesn't matter about what laws, what's criminalized, whatever. If we lose the ability to care about other people, we're in trouble no matter what we do. So
I agree with all of that. So, but can I be as usual say something against
absolutely
as is my wont. So you see, you know that you know the truth, right? Now the other side, you don't. Okay. The other side, and now this is the awkward part, those people you say are lunatics, they are 100%, they know that they know the truth. They know it. It's not that they think it, they know it. And we now have a clash. Now, one of you or neither of you is right or wrong. How do we get past that all of us here know that we're sane, and in somewhere else there's a group meeting and they're discussing 5G and all sorts of weird things, and chips are being put into us by naughty people, and they're all sitting together and they're talking to each other, and they're absolutely right as far as they're concerned, and they're talking about another group that says that this is not right. So
and here again is where the sign. Now, someone cited. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, carry on.
Someone said earlier that the scientific method was where you discern fantasy from reality, and I think we need, actually, if anything, this is where the scientific method is good. How do you discern between those things? Because none of it has any verification. If you do any, even on the internet, just a preliminary check, this is incredibly poorly sourced material. And it's capable, as we as people can check that out on an individual basis. We don't do it enough.
Where do we check it out, Terry? On the internet?
Yeah, as a first start, because there are levels of reliability, certainly we can do some checking on the internet. Would be nice, because many people, most of the people I see, and this is a classic cult technique, is you say, don't trust anybody else, don't trust anybody else, don't trust anybody else. Only listen to me, only listen to me, only listen to me. And I say, and this is why I say that criminalization is not a solution to something. It's, we need to talk more. David Brin in his science fiction novel Earth talks about how important it is to have this culture where everybody has access to all the information. I agree very much with David on that. I think that's a good strategy. And he predicted things 20 years about what's going on now that are just amazing. He had his cell phones and he didn't know what it was. But yet the descent into the things in which they're just patently, by a simple argument, not true. I've talked to people in my family just about simple science that we don't have the tech to do nano injections of something to that. It's simply, we can't even get little gears to work, because I happen to work in that. So I get, but the fact that I could speak as a scientist and everything, we can't do that. If we could, it would be used commercially to clear out arteries, and you'd know all about it. And by the way, why are you worried about injecting these into your blood system when you're carrying a phone connected to an internet with a microphone and a camera with you 24/7? Which is one of the most hilariously insane things. You're worried about tracking devices? What do you think that video thing is? You're taking a picture of yourself in the Capitol building is? What do you think that is? So it just, you get this crazy lack of logic, and we need to try to get away from some of that. And again, I think personal touch is important. I do believe there's such a thing as internet psychosis, that you give over so much of your guardianship of truth to this stupid thing sitting in front of all of us right at this moment, that we just lose touch of basics of, go give your kid a hug and go talk to your neighbor and see if you can help somebody. Because if you lose touch with that and you get wrapped up in this thing, it is disconnection from reality, because these are just electrons and little pixels and little light up things in your screen, and you shouldn't be treating them as reality. It's not a very good reality.
Reality is one of those things that we can speak about for a long time. But I mean, you do see what I meant. The fact that we here think that we are sane, and the other lot sitting doing their Zoom are insane, and they think the same about us. And they get their information. They get their information from YouTube, and there's lots of YouTubes out there that will give you all the crazy information. And then if we say, but that's ridiculous, they'll say, the trouble with you is you're closed. You must open your mind and do your own research.
In some ways, when that line is used, that in itself can be used as an actual propaganda line, saying you have to be open to what I'm saying, even though I'm saying that there are lizard people who are invisible going around eating babies. All right. So you say, well, that's an interesting prospect. And I'm supposed to balance half my time worrying about that. We go like, I think we could get a better balance on where a good reality check is. And also, by the way, there's just some simple techniques of legislation, of law, of science, where if the source is saying about the invisible lizard people going around eating your babies is one of your sources, and you got all this other stuff from that source, you might want to think that over a little bit. The scientific the method of reasoning, of verification, of going back and verifying, I think is very relevant to your comment. That we don't just treat it and say that, oh yes, I always will accept anything that comes from this source, even though I found out this source is incredibly unreliable in the following points, versus another source that said, yeah, they make mistakes, but you know, they actually tried to fix them.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. It's a very difficult and fraught topic. So we're gonna stop on that one for the moment. I think that I don't know if you lot are tired or anything, but I can go on for hours. I think, okay, look, I knew we wouldn't get past this particular stage. I haven't even finished this particular stage. I wanted to speak about history, and I wanted to talk about truth, but we've been at it. But by the way, Lucas, you've been tapping away there and saying some very, very interesting stuff, and it's not fair that we didn't hear it. Lucas, are you with me? Can you hear me? Ah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just have a bit of what you tapped out. It's not fair. I'll see it tomorrow, but nobody else will.
Oh, I'm not sorry. I'm not sure I understand.
You tapped out some interesting stuff, right? You made some comments that I found interesting, and I don't remember what they were because I'm listening and looking and watching you and seeing who's going to talk next and etc. So no. Okay, in that case, no. In that case, I just want. No, you really did. I'll see them tomorrow. In any case, if anybody, we're getting a lot of people. If you're interested in making sure you get on here, and if you contact me, and give me your details, well, not all your details, but email it is enough. I will make sure that you get a personal invitation for the next one. Okay. So I just want to finish off by mentioning one thing. I didn't get on to Einstein, which I'll do next time. I think next time we'll do what I wanted to do. The second part. If you're interested, I want to talk about some deep matters of science like quantum mechanics and the connection with philosophy and reality, which is quite heavy, but I think it could be quite fun, or maybe fun is not the right word, but tiring fun. I just want to end with saying that Einstein's Greek teacher informed him that whatever field in life he chose, he would fail at it. Let that be a lesson to you all. So anybody got anything to say? In that case, I will see you all on the first Sunday of March. And you don't need to wear masks that time either.
I just wanted to say I know one of these conspiracy theory people who believes all the conspiracy theories because he actually pays for a conspiracy theory service to feed him the misinformation. And it is misinformation. I had to contact him and explain to him how the data was being changed for him on InfoWars. And the thing is that this is stimulating. The reason the people like that channel is because it stimulates them. They find it more stimulating than reading a science magazine, for example, or listening to a science podcast, perhaps. Or maybe they just need to be steered towards the other podcasts that would be more interesting for them. But this is the way it works. The reason it works is because it stimulates the synapses, same as people who are interested in philosophy and science.
James, the specific mechanism they use in this is that they try to get you angry before your sentience kicks in. This is an actual strategy for the more malicious designers of these programs. So the idea is get you angry first, and then you won't think it through, And then it starts to wear off and you start to think it through, and then they get you angry again the next day, and they get you angry again the next day. This is malicious design by people who know exactly what.
Yeah, that's a factor, but once again, it's stimulation. It is
Yes.
that's a getting angry as a way of being emotional, as a way of being stimulated.
Yes.
So
and
if
people are
we
using that emotional also to circumvent and go around your logic, because most of us realize a day later we say, "Oh, that didn't sound right," and this is how you get people to literally forget a video that they saw the day before that they know is true, and then they. So it's there's some very nefarious intent in some of the design of some programs. So that concerns me greatly.
right, but equally, it's misinformation. In other
Yes.
words, these channels present misinformation, and the person maybe the person, even if he hadn't been manipulated emotionally, he might be ready to accept any information because of his disposition towards
yes
towards information.
It's propaganda on steroids with spreadsheets and mathematical models to back it up.
I like that word, propaganda.
If that didn't scare people, I don't know what would, because that's scary stuff.
James, I want to ask you the people who run this service, do they know that they're being untruthful and malicious, or do they pass on their belief?
They specifically manipulate information. They take pages from the internet and change words all over the pages in order to make it look like COVID-19 existed in 2017. So this was one of the things that he presented, that COVID-19 existed in 2017, I was able to find the website that had produced the data, and I downloaded the report. That was the report that he was showing with exactly the right data, and I showed that all the headings had been changed to say COVID-19 when originally they said medical information, medical devices, or something like that.
So
some of this.
So it's malicious. It's
malicious. Yes, absolutely.
And why?
It's almost always malicious.
Why?
And also,
why do they do it? What's the motivation here?
For subscribers. It's for income. This guy's been making a ton of money off his mental disability for years by running a TV and podcast service.
Profit is the primary motive in most of these systems, but also keep in mind that there are nation-state actors in this. This is not. There are some big forces that operate in this domain. The ability to scatter so many of these bots so quickly has nation-state support. That can't be done by individual. But the profit motive is huge and is a source of many of these things. So it's a mix. And also you have people who are genuinely crazy, or people who are just kind of crazy, but they realize they make money. And then you have just ones who just absolutely flat out know everything they say is false. It's a mix. The world's complicated. But there's some nasty stuff.
Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Lucas, you're still doing it. You're still making incredibly interesting chats there, which I can see popping up, and you won't share them with us. Lucas,
Lucas, talk to us.
Lucas,
I'm just too distracted and anxious to intervene in the middle of conversation.
Yes, but you're typing away and doing stuff, and it's all good stuff. I'm going to read it tomorrow.
Okay.
It will not disappear. Okay. Anybody wants to see this video again and sit for another 3 hours? You can write to me and I'll let you know where you can see it. I'm sure you want to see it all again. So I thank you very, very much for coming. It was great having you all, and I hope to see you next month for other interesting and very, very simple things to talk about. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.